Well, good afternoon. It's Dave again. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about moderation. Uh, I'm pretty sure that everyone by now knows that I'm a political moderate. I've made the statement many times on the few podcasts that I've done. So, what I want to talk about is one of the reasons why we should look about bringing more moderation into our politics. Now, if you look at the way our forefathers formed the government, they really made it difficult to pass anything unless everybody agreed to it. Um, just, I don't want to give a history lesson on it, but think about the way they do the votes and the House and the Senate balancing one another out and them being able to block the legislation because one or the other has control of each house. Okay? So if they don't step across the aisle and negotiate, nothing is ever going to be passed. It's like the student body government. I mean, obviously much more complicated than that, but still the things are the same. You had to, come across the aisle and talk to everyone. But like a student body, the forefathers didn't want political parties. George Washington said it would be the death of democracy if we broke into political parties. He would be horrified. So, in a way, that's the way it's supposed to be, is more like a student body government. And I don't know what's happened. I think it's the news and this polarization that we have, where everything is now life or death. You're going to win or lose, and if you win or lose, it's the end of the world. So both political parties, political strategy is we're going to grab a hold of power and shove a bunch of legislation through, and then when the affiliation of the American public, we go from a liberal to a conservative, it gets changed, and then it gets changed back and forth. I think what we really need to look at is don't be voting for the extremists in your party, okay? And I'm not going to pick a particular political party or call anybody out. You know who I'm talking about. They're on the right and on the left, and they have extreme views in those areas, and that's great. But they're not going to step across the aisle and negotiate. To them, it has to be mutually assured destruction. One of the reasons why John McCain didn't vote to terminate the Affordable Care Act was because he said the American people didn't want that. The vote was to repeal. The idea had been to repeal it, but what happened is that even Republicans, they didn't want it repealed. They wanted to replace with something better, which they hadn't planned on, because the original thing was we're going to get rid of it. So they were very surprised when people who had it were like, oh no, now we want it changed. Well, McCain realized that people wanted this, and that if he did vote against it and they did get rid of it, the next time the liberals came in, they would just vote it back in, and it would become this ping pong ball. And he felt that both sides should sit down and negotiate. And I agree. That's something that really should have happened. So when we have emergencies, I can think of all the times, during the recession, there were all these jobs bills, right? And nobody would vote for any of them because the Republicans wouldn't vote for a bill that had any participation from the liberals. It was ridiculous. Bipartisan bill after bipartisan bill was wiped out. And I shouldn't just say Republicans, because the liberals have done it to Republican legislation as well. We polarize. We have two versions of legislation, and all of a sudden it's a big fight. So it was a big enough emergency that we got our COVID package the first time, but now it's gone back to politics as usual. The American people, it's really not that important. Let's quibble over the legislation and go back to partisan politics. it'll be a long time before anything happens on the second part of the stimulus because of it. So we need people who are stepping across the aisle. So I'm not telling any of you to give up your party loyalty. Continue to vote Republican, continue to vote Democrat, however you want to vote. But pick the liberal Republican. Pick the conservative Democrat in your party. The one who's going to sit down with his opposite, negotiate something that's going to be good for both parties, and that's going to be flexible enough to work with one another in an emergency so that we can get the help that we need. Do not let the news that only reports the most extreme positions influence you. Remember what they say. Take 90% of what this side tells you, 90% of what that side tells you, throw all that BS out, and the remaining 10% on each side is what you should consider. So that's what I'm saying. In the future, I really hope that you look at your candidates in the primaries. If you've got some nutball candidate who has to win his position 100%, or he's going to stomp his heels and do nothing, that's not the guy you vote for in the primary. Get rid of him then and there. Bring the moderate up that's going to work with the other side and get something done. All right, that's my kind of little rant for this week. You have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next week.